So here's the deal. The window is not fitting perfectly into the hole.
Hi guys, I'm Jim.
And I'm Sherry. If you're new to our channel, right now we're converting a Sprinter van into our dream tiny home on wheels.
This is actually our first van build project, and we're documenting our experience to provide a newbie's perspective. Our goal is really simple. We just want to provide some inspiration ideas to help you tackle your own van build project.
If you'd like to follow our van build series, be sure to subscribe and click the bell below to be notified when new videos come out. So before we get going, here's a quick overview of what to expect. First, we'll start with a high-level project overview so you can get a lay of the land.
Next, we'll walk you through the project, including important tool considerations and step-by-step build instructions. And then finally, we'll wrap things up by sharing what we've learned and what we do differently next time.
Plus, in the description below, we've created a quick reference guide including time-stamped links to each step in the process and a full parts list with links.
Okay, so before we go any further, I just want to underscore a really important point. We're not professionals.
As if that's not obvious.
That said, though, we'd hate to steer you in the wrong direction, so please make sure you thoroughly do all of your research before starting your project.
Now that we have that out of the way, I'll confess. Going into it, we were pretty nervous about cutting a huge hole in our van. But it's actually a fairly straightforward project that involves basically two steps. Cut the right size hole in the van, and place the window in the hole and secure it in place.
Right, but to provide a little bit more background, basically van windows come in two different flavors. You have van windows that are OEM style windows that are designed to fit into the van's OEM window stamp out, and you have non-OEM windows that require you to basically cut a custom hole. Both OEM style and non-OEM style windows are installed in one of two ways generally. The first way is to glue it into place, and that's where you basically use an adhesive sealant to hold the window up against the wall of the van. And then you have clamp ring style, and that's where basically you put the window into the hole in the outside of the van, come into the inside, put a clamp ring on the back of the window, screw it in place, and it basically clamps the window against the wall of the frame, basically sandwiching it in place. Okay, so we're actually installing a Sierra Laurence T-vent window, which is an OEM style window that's held in place with a clamp ring. Now, to cut the right size opening for our window, all we need to do is cut along the raised edge that runs along the rim of the stamp out. Okay, so rather than spending 15 minutes walking through all the different tools and supplies needed to complete the build, we put together a comprehensive list in the description below. That said, this project's essentially about cutting a big hole in the van, so we'd like to offer some thoughts on how you select the right tool for the job. Now, there are a couple of key considerations. One, can the saw easily cut through the van's steel walls? And two, is it easy to handle around corners? There are a lot of different tools that could potentially do the job, a grinder or metal shears, for example, but we quickly narrowed it down to our top two. The first is a one-handed reciprocating saw, and the other option is a jigsaw. Now, both saws use a reciprocating blade to make the cut and are more than capable of negotiating around corners and cutting through the van's steel walls. As it relates, though, to the OEM style window that we're installing, the big difference between the two is that a reciprocating saw has a smaller shoe than the jigsaw. And by shoe, I'm just referring to kind of this foot on the bottom of the saw. This is really important. It's important because with a reciprocating saw, basically that allows you to the smaller shoe allows you to easily cut along the OEM stamp out inside the van. By contrast, the larger shoe in the jigsaw struggles to negotiate the kind of interior contours of the van, which basically means that it's easier to use a jigsaw to cut on the outside. Now, basically the translation for all this is that with a reciprocating saw, you simply drill a pilot hole through the wall of the van to start your blade, and then you can just cut along the OEM stamp out that I showed you earlier. A jigsaw, on the other hand, requires an additional step. Basically, you need to take that line that's inside the van and you need to transpose it to the outside so you have a guide to follow when you're making your cut. In the description below, we've provided good options for whichever way you decide to go. Our first choice, after having done our homework, was to use a reciprocating saw. But that's not what we used. We actually ended up using a jigsaw because the jigsaw is what we had on hand. At the end of the video, we'll kind of talk about the jigsaw and what our experience has been like with that, and most importantly, we'll talk about which tool we'd use next time. Okay, so I'm kind of on an uphill battle right now. The light's fading, I've got a gaggle of kids playing behind me, but I'm just going to try and power through so that we can get this done today. So bear with me. It's really important not only to select the right saw, but the right saw blade. So whether you're using a reciprocating saw or a jigsaw, here are just a couple of important considerations. One, make sure that you're picking a blade that's designed to cut through metal with enough teeth per inch to minimize vibration when you're cutting through the van's thin metal walls. In our experience, cutting the holes for our max fan in our window, we've tried both 24 tooth and 30 tooth braids, and both were completely fine. The other thing to consider is that you're going to be cutting curves, and you're also going to be negotiating over uneven surfaces at times. And for that reason, I think it's good to choose a longer blade that's designed to cut tight radius or make tight radius cuts. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, since we're installing a Sierra Laurence T-vent window that's designed to fit into the OEM stamp out, we can use the stamp out as a template to guide our cut. That's good news if you're using a reciprocating saw, because that means you're ready to make your cut. There's no additional step required. However, if you're going to use a jigsaw, what we need to do is we need to transpose our cut line to the outer wall of the van, since the larger foot or shoe on the jigsaw, it makes it difficult to navigate or negotiate your cut line from the inside. And by that, I basically mean this. When you are trying to run or cut along the edge of this stamp out, you've got these pillars that are going to infringe or impact your ability to follow the cut line with this larger shoe. And so it's just easier to cut from the outside. So the good news is transposing the cut line is simple. All we need is a hammer and a center punch, which we use to make a series of small indentations that'll be visible on the outer wall of the van. To make our indentations, we simply line up the center punch along the edge of the stamp out and give the punch a couple of taps with the hammer. It's important to figure out how much hammer force is required. Tap a couple of times and then check to see if your indentations are visible on the outside wall of the van. Just a word of caution, don't overdo it by hitting the wall too hard. Too much pressure could chip the paint on the outside wall, and I suspect with a really sharp center punch like ours, if you hit it too hard, you could poke a hole right through the wall. The idea is to work your way all the way around the OEM stamp out, spacing indentations an inch or so apart. So as you mark your curved corners, you might need to space your indentations closer together to ensure an accurate cut line. Okay, so we're making progress. We've got the outline that we created using our hole punch on the inside of the van. You can actually see kind of this faint series of dots right along the outside of the van. And that's basically our cut line. To make it a little more clear, we're gonna use a Sharpie and just kind of connect all the dots so we have a really clear cut line and we don't get lost once we start cutting. And then finally, we're gonna put down some painter's tape around the outer edge to make sure that all of our paint's protected from the shoe of the jigsaw. For the curved corners where the dots are really close together, it's just, connecting one dot to the next. It's really easy. Along the top, bottom, and sides, the easiest way to get a nice straight line is to use something like a ruler to connect the dots. Okay, so now that we've got a nice clear line to follow, we just need to lay down some painter's tape to protect the paint on the outside of the van, and we should be ready to cut. So to get our jigsaw started, we're going to use a step bit to drill a pilot hole just above our cut line. And then we're basically going to cut everything except for the long section along the top. We're going to leave that till last. That way we can secure this giant flap of sheet metal so it doesn't come falling out of the van and damage the side of the van or something like that.
Before we start cutting, we want to make sure that we catch as much of the metal shavings as possible. So we've taped the little crevices in this window, which we'll vacuum out when we're finished. And we also created this fancy little trough to catch as many of the shavings as possible. And we've also taped off the floors to make sure it doesn't get underneath the floorboard. So remember earlier when we mentioned to make sure you select a blade that's long enough to minimize the risk of kickback? Well, this is what learning the hard way looks like. Jim was negotiating a raised section of wall that borders the cut line, and the blade was too short. And this is what it did to the van and blade. Now all that's left is to cut the top, but before we do, we're taping a couple of boxes to the van, and I'm holding the cutout to ensure it doesn't drop and do any damage. Before test fitting the window, Jim's using a metal file to deburr the edges. Okay, so this is the big moment when we find out if the window fits. And it doesn't. Fortunately, the hole is too small rather than too big.
Okay, so now we've got to do some trimming with the Dremel. As you can probably tell from all the sparks, grinding's making a bit of a mess. So to contain all the metal shavings, we've hung up a couple of extra plastic sheets inside the van. This is taking a while, but I feel like we're getting close. Just a little bit more now. Sigh. And now it's dark. Okay, so we're back at it again. We're still trying to make some tweaks to the size of the hole to accommodate our window. It is still a little bit too small. So I think this is a great example of the right tool for the job. I think in retrospect a grinder would have been really good, but we had a Dremel tool. Dremel tool's been great, but it's all about getting the right Dremel bit. We started off with a grinding stone, and it's just very, very difficult to control and very slow process. We've changed to a grinding wheel, and it's now actually going really, really quickly. Okay, I'm confident now we're on the home stretch. Just a little bit more trimming with the Dremel. And drum roll, please. Success. It fits.
The paper you see is actually left over from covering the hole overnight. Feels good to be pulling down all the protection we put up. So this part is important because we don't want to leave any metal shavings behind that could cause rust. A little vacuuming, wipe down all the surfaces, and we're ready to paint.
Before installing the window, we still need to protect the freshly cut edges against rust. For that, I'm adding 2 coats of Rust-Oleum. To apply, I'm using a small foam brush, which makes the job easy. If you notice the fresh layer of blue painter's tape around the edge, that part's optional. I just like masking to get a nice clean line, even if nobody's ever going to see it. So we gave the first coat a few hours to dry. Just one more coat to go. And that's that. We're finished. We'll let the paint dry overnight. That way we can minimize the chance of chipping when we go to fit the window. Okay, so one last step in the process, and this is something we got from Van Windows Direct, the company that we bought our windows from. We're going to drill small pilot holes using a 3/32 drill bit into the body or the frame of our window at all the points where we're supposed to apply screws through the clamp ring. And the idea behind this, according to Van Windows Direct, which I totally buy into, is the pilot holes make it a lot easier to seat the screws once you're installing the window in the van, and you're less likely to shear off or strip out the screw heads. The key to drilling pilot holes is to make sure the screw holes in the clamp ring line up with the channel located in the back of the window frame. It's also important to make sure there's no movement in the clamp ring while drilling, as it could cause the holes to misalign. To do this, we start by seating the clamp ring over the window frame and installing 2 screws at the bottom of the frame where the clamp ring splits. This will help hold the clamp ring in place. We also found it helpful to add 4 clamps at the corners to make sure the clamp ring stays put while drilling. Then, it's just a matter of drilling pilot holes for each of the screws by using the holes in the clamp ring as a guide. Okay, so everything's ready to go. All we need to do now is take the window and install it in the van, which means basically putting the window in the hole, putting the clamp ring in the back of it, and screwing everything into place.
While I hold the window in place, Jim can install the clamp ring from the inside. Using an impact driver set on low torque setting, start by installing a screw on each side of the ring. All he needs to do is line up the screw holes on the clamp ring with the pilot holes and install the provided screws. Make sure to only tighten slightly. Once you have a screw on each side, the window is holding itself in place. Now Jim can add the rest of the screws, working back and forth, up and down to maintain even pressure on the window. Once all screws are installed, slowly tighten screws a little at a time. Tightening in rounds is better than screwing everything tight at once. The key here is to take it slow and don't over tighten. As you tighten, the glass will slowly pull itself inward against the wall. To finish, use a Phillips head screwdriver and be sure not to over tighten, as you could bend the clamp ring. Oh, and one more thing. After driving around for a couple of days, be sure to check your screws and tighten as necessary. Okay, so another project down. Despite some pre-project jitters, we're pleased with the end result.
Definitely.
Yeah, for difficulty, I think I'd give it about a 3 out of 5, mainly because we had a few fitment issues, which took some trimming to resolve. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think from my perspective, this is a project that's all about cutting the right size hole in your van. And I think for that, the biggest decision is what tools to use for the job. And I guess that begs the question, what tool would we use next time? Would we use something different? I think the jigsaw worked out well for cutting the hole. The Dremel was slow, right? It was slow, and I think it was difficult to control. Part of that is user error because we started off with a grinding wheel, which is a total rookie.
A grinding stone.
A grinding stone. That was a total rookie mistake, and I wouldn't do that again. That was terrible. And I think the grinding wheel sped that up, but it's still just, it was a slow process. So if I could choose what to use, then I probably would use a reciprocating saw. I think it offers a couple of big advantages that would save us a lot of time. The first is that it would eliminate the need to transpose the cut line, but it would also allow us to cut directly along the OEM stamp out, following that edge that I showed you earlier. And that basically serves as a natural blade guide, which I think would improve accuracy of our cut a lot and possibly completely eliminate the need, or certainly minimize the need, to trim. Now, if we did have to trim, I would definitely, no question, go with a grinder. I think it would cut a lot more material off a lot more quickly, and it would be easier to handle because you have a larger grinding wheel that's cutting along the thin edge of the van. But that's it, I think. Do you have anything?
No, I don't think so. But as a reminder, be sure to check out the description below for a summary of tools, parts, and everything you'll need to complete the project. Also, if you like this video, we'd love it if you could give us a thumbs up. And click here to check out more videos in our van build playlist.
Yeah, so I guess that's it, right?
Yeah, that's it.
All right, another one in the bag. We'll have more videos coming soon. See you in the next one, guys.
See ya.
Thanks.